I prefer to look at this case in this court as an opportunity for our constitutional order.
Impeachment of Rigathi Gachagua has captured our attention, and I learned quite some important things. First of all, let's review some of the issues that were said. One of the things that caught my attention was something said by the advocate Paul Muite. And Muite basically implied the trial on the impeachment of Gachagua is less about Gachagua and more about process.
Those three judges sitting separately, each one of them made a finding that there were serious weighty constitutional issues raised that needed to be fully canvassed during the hearing of the petition.
And this would be repeated.
My Lord, the best guarantor for security is observance of the rule of law, constitutionalism, and the Constitution.
The other advocate, Mr. Ongoya, who said that it is that every decision made, I think by the government, they're saying, has to be subject to judicial review so that its compliance with the Constitution and the law can be gauged. And the reason why this caught my attention, among other things, is that initially my view had been that the case that Gachagua took to court was about Gachagua's impeachment. But as I listened to the lawyers arguing, I sort of had the scales fall off my eyes, and I discovered, or rather it hit me, that although at face value it's about Gachagua's impeachment, the substance of it is about the Constitution. It's about constitutionalism. It's about whether our governments or our government works within the confines of the Constitution, as the Constitution demands it to say. Among the interesting things that brought out this is, I think it was Ongoya who said that Kenyans have been failed by the legislature, by the executive, and by the independent institutions or commissions that are supposed to do their work without averring to anybody except the facts, the evidence, and the law that is before them.
Allow me to submit at that juncture from the very outset that the process undertaken by the President of the Republic of Kenya, by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, which was mentioned in the President's communique to Parliament, to the National Assembly, by the IEBC, that was also included in the President's communique to the National Assembly, and by the National Assembly itself. Even the pretense of public participation was now taken away.
And the reason why this struck me was because Ongoya said that the Constitution gives the process of the impeachment of the president, of the deputy president, 74 days within which to act. But our parliament, proving itself super efficient, did it in 6 hours. That is admirable, but as Ongoya pointed out, you discover that there are lots of things that go to waste. For instance, IDs and passports still take eternity to get, and things don't always. In fact, days after the impeachment of Gachagua in the Senate, in the National Assembly, the Speaker, Moses Wetangula, was complaining of lack of quorum in Parliament. In other words, even though the parliamentarians had been very efficient in dealing with the impeachment of Gachagua, they were still inefficient in some of the most outstanding and important areas of their jobs. One of which is basically to be in Parliament, to be present in Parliament, to debate the bills and deal with the laws that they're supposed to, etc. So those are some of the things that we got out of this past week. Then I also realized that we were having a big problem which we were not seeing. When people voted in 2022, the vote for the presidential vote was for Ruto and Gachagua. Nobody voted for Kindiki. If Kindiki gets appointed as a deputy president, he's going to be in office for 3 years unelected by the people, which again is a problem. I think it is one of those things that the court case, the judges, when they make their ruling, need to bring out clearly what happens. We have an elected deputy president because essentially we voted for Gachagua as the DP. And he was in office, or he is in office for 2 years if the impeachment is allowed to progress. But if Kindiki gets his way, appointed by parliament, appointed by the president and approved by parliament, essentially we are having an elected president, an elected deputy president for 3 years. And I thought, wow, I hadn't figured that one out. And so I think among the many things that we have to deal with as Kenyans is that our constitution, I don't know what the framers of our constitution said about the impeachment of the president, of the deputy president or the president, and the replacement. I know when it's the president, there's a period of time, I don't know whether it's 90 days, within which the deputy president has to act before an election is done. But I'm not so sure it says so elaborately in the same way about the deputy president. And I think those are things that we need clarified, because here's the reason why this is important. If we do not have a well laid out constitutional and legal process of how to replace an impeached deputy president, it could be impeachment, could be disability, could be whatever, those many other issues that are mentioned. But what happens if the office of the deputy president is vacated? Maybe it happens within the first month of being in office. We go to the elections, we vote, we have a new president and his deputy. Then in 1 month, the deputy president is incapacitated or becomes sick, is dead, or something like that. What then happens? Do we get a new deputy president who is unelected by the people? Because essentially they are voted for as a ticket, the deputy president and the president. I think those are among the things that we hope the court will help us to clarify. And here are some really important issues I gathered as I've been listening to the arguments this week. The Senate, let's call them the process by which the deputy president was impeached, claimed that there was public participation. And indeed, there were appearances to it. You remember there was something going on at the Bomas of Kenya. And what is interesting, the reason why this captures my attention is that my hero, Morara Kebaso, went there to attend what essentially was a public event and got beaten up. He was chased out. I think there was an attempt to kill him. When somebody is throwing a chair at you, that chair, the leg of the chair could enter your eye, could hit you on the brain, could cause internal hemorrhage, could hit you on the heart, whatever, it can kill you. So essentially what we watched happen to Morara was, in my humble view, something very close to attempted murder. But leaving that aside, the question is, if that was a public participation event about the impeachment of Gachagua, why was Morara being chased away? He was just an ordinary member of the public. That is among the things I gathered this week. The other thing, somebody said, this is not just an examination of the impeachment process of Gachagua. There's a lady who stood up and said, this is an examination of our constitution. It is also an examination of our judiciary. An examination essentially of the judges who are sitting there to decide on this case. This is an examination of a lot of things Kenyan. And the hope that we must all have is that the decisions the judges make is going to help all of us move forward. Now, the reason why I now see things differently, you see, I am not a person from Murima. And Gachagua always made it very clear that his passion was for the people of Murima, which means people like me who are not from Murima were basically being excluded. So coming from that point of view, I really didn't like Gachagua. In fact, I saw it at first as a very good thing that he got impeached. But now when you remove Gachagua from the picture and basically just consider the whole process of his impeachment, you want to change your mind. I mean, I got quite influenced by asking the question of whether his impeachment, the process of his impeachment, really followed the constitutional order. And the more I think about it, the more I find it questionable. I don't have answers. I am asking questions. But I am tempted to agree with the lawyers of Gachagua, you know, Kina Paul Muite, Mr. Ongoya, that when you remove Gachagua from the picture and just consider the impeachment process that took place on its own as a solitary subject, then you find all these questions coming up. That as much as we can say Gachagua deserved to be impeached, but the process of impeachment appears questionable. That's something conclusion I came to. I've already talked about Kindiki becoming deputy president without having been voted for by the people, because we vote for the president and the deputy as a single ticket. Nobody voted for Kindiki. So why should he be the deputy president? Those are things that the judges will help us to clarify. And then there were these other questions that Ongoya raised, the advocate Ongoya, the efficiency of the independent institutions of government. You know, like in a single night or in a few days, the EACC, the anti-corruption body, had already cleared Kindiki to be deputy president. How did that happen so fast? Maybe it was possible, it did happen. But Ongoya did raise the issue about the timelines, and I think that's something we need to take a good look at. The other thing that is absolutely a constitutional scandal is the president, in nominating Kindiki, saying that he had been cleared by the IEBC. And the IEBC, basically, as we exist, does not exist as we sit here today, because the IEBC is not, it doesn't have any commissioners. It's basically, it's been paralyzed. It can't function. So how did the IEBC clear Kindiki to be nominated for the deputy president's post? And the reason why this matters, ladies and gentlemen, among the many desires we Kenyans have expressed recently, and I side with them, is that we need to recall MPs. But if we recall MPs and there's no IEBC, we cannot have a by-election to replace those MPs, which basically means we who recall our MPs will stay unrepresented until the IEBC is properly composed. But the IEBC has not been composed. Therefore, we cannot risk recalling our MPs. Therefore, we cannot risk going without representation in Parliament, because the IEBC cannot conduct a by-election, because the IEBC is basically dysfunctional as we speak. It cannot function. How then did the IEBC approve of Kindiki to be the deputy president? I think those are interesting things. Then, I think it was Muite who said the case is not about Gachagua, it's about the process. Another interesting question that was raised, I think these matters, the Senate debated this, and I think Parliament used it as one of the grounds for impeaching Gachagua, that he was undermining the president. And lawyer Paul Muite asked, is undermining the president listed within the Constitution as one of the grounds for impeachment of the deputy president? As a matter of fact, I don't think it is. So think about that. I think it's interesting. And so I am tempted to side with Advocate Ongoya when he said the impeachment of Gachagua is an opportunity to, these are not his words, I'm just paraphrasing. He said, it is an opportunity to advance our constitutionalism. I think that's really nice. Then, of course, the other part, which perhaps I did question. My initial stand was that as much as I don't like Gachagua, I felt poorly that he was impeached when he was in hospital. Humanitarian grounds. And yet now we know from what the lawyers are saying that the Constitution provides 74 days for the impeachment process to happen. Why did the Senate rush the process? It had, so to speak, all the time in the world. They could have allowed Gachagua to go to hospital, get treated, and then return. I mean, claims that he was pretending notwithstanding, but for appearance's sake, Gachagua should have been allowed on humanitarian grounds just to go through the process of healing and return. What was the problem with the Senate waiting? Why did they find it so hard to wait? 74 days provided according to the lawyer. I haven't read that part of the Constitution, but our Senate could not wait. There was a rush to push the process out of the door and to usher in a new deputy president. So that is really, really something that I think we need to pay attention to. Something else, I'm referring to my notes. Now, to the question I've just raised, or rather that was raised by Gachagua's lawyers, Ongoya, as to whether being loyal to the president or being disloyal to the president is a ground for impeachment according to the Constitution. I don't think it is. But here is the larger question. If the president and the deputy president disagreed as to become dysfunctional, should the deputy president leave or should the deputy president be impeached? And if so, the question is, why can't the same grounds be used to impeach the president, for instance? Is it possible for us to say the deputy president and the president do not agree to such an extent that they have become a liability to the nation? Therefore, let's get rid of the president, not the deputy. Is that a possibility? That's something to think about. Then, as I come to the end, now, a question that we need to deal with. When we got the new constitution, one of the things, if you remember the debates around it as we went to a referendum for the new constitution, you got the clear message that the framers of the constitution wanted a land, a nation, where the president was not authoritarian, where one person did not hold the reins of power, could not determine the fates of other people, etc. Now, here is the thing. If the president can push through parliament the impeachment of his deputy, and by the same means bring in a new deputy president, are we crossing a line whereby the president is tiptoeing toward authoritarianism, where he can be able to determine what happens everywhere across the nation? Now, this matters because we've seen our current president, William Ruto, making decisions that are completely unquestionable, completely questionable, decisions that have not been no consultation with other arms of government, etc. The whole thing about the separation of powers has appeared to be trampled underfoot, not only during Ruto's time, but even to an extent during Uhuru's time. So, should we Kenyans pay great attention to how the president acts, particularly in this case, as a microcosm of how he acts in all other areas of governance. And there's a reason why I think that's important. Because the spirit of our Constitution, in my understanding as a journalist, is that all arms of the government have to be humble. You remember when Gachagua first tried to go to court to stop the process of his impeachment at the Senate, and the courts restrained themselves and said, no, that's not our area. But the same is expected of the executive. We haven't seen such restraint in the president's behavior. But the framers of our Constitution, in my understanding, wanted a case where there's humility on all three arms of the government, where the president is able to say, as much as you, the citizens, want me to do this, I can't. My hands are tied by the law, by the Constitution. I can't do that. That is the work of the judiciary or the work of the legislature. Whatever you want, it's only the legislature that can do that. For instance, if I really, really hate two things about the executive. One, the reference to the president as His Excellency. He is just Mr. President. In my view, that's what he should be. And that's what it initially was. He wasn't. Our Constitution, the 2010 Constitution, initially did not refer to the president as His Excellency. But suppose our current president is humble enough to say, I hate being referred to as Your Excellency. I'm a human being just like you. I'm a servant of the people just like you. I don't want to be called Your Excellency. But I cannot change it because it's in law. So what we do, let's speak to Parliament to deal with that. So in other words, the Constitution, the spirit of the Constitution is that both the executive and the legislature and the judiciary would have the humble heart, as the judiciary has already exemplified for us, to say, yeah, that would be nice to do, but it's not in my power to do it. Let's ask the other side to take care of it. Such restraint is what we ask, or rather we demand, of the executive as well as the judiciary. That the president cannot dictate to the anti-corruption body, the EACC. The president cannot dictate to the judiciary. The president cannot dictate to the Lands Commission. The president cannot dictate to all these independent commissions, including the police. It's called the police. I've forgotten what it is. But anyway, there's a commission, an independent commission, that is supposed to see the work of the police. That the president would avoid commenting on police issues, such as, I've ordered the police. The president is not supposed to order the police. The police are the law enforcement body of our government. They're supposed to act independently, such that if the president's son broke the law, they can go and arrest him. But if they're taking orders from the president, what if the president breaks the law? What do the police do? So the issue of the independence of our of institutions, which has been highlighted by Gachagua's lawyers, I think is an important thing that perhaps we can work on the way forward. I say this, I think that we need to use this attempt to impeach Gachagua as a critical moment to examine our laws, to re-examine our laws, and see where our 2010 Constitution how far it has brought us, the weaknesses we have noticed. Then we have a referendum. Because one of the beautiful things about our Constitution is that it does not allow any of the institutions of government to act critically without consulting the people. When we talk about public participation, it's not just public participation on questions that they bring to us. It goes as far, I dare suggest, as issues to do with the referendum. There are parts of the Constitution that cannot be interfered with by the president or the parliament or even the judiciary without reference to the people through a referendum. And I think this Gachagua impeachment thing is a blessing, if only we can push for it. Because if we deal with it properly, I think, with the help of the judiciary, we can get rid of a lot of stuff that have haunted us for years. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that we can take this as an opportunity to re-examine our constitution, and we are hoping for a referendum. Let's push for a referendum. But remember, a referendum can't take place without the IBC. So here is the thing. Once again, we find ourselves stumbling on the parliament, that parliament needs to take a stand on the composition of the IBC, because the president clearly is not interested. We want an independent parliament that never lets us walk this road, whereby we're just operating on some sort of autopilot as concerns issues to do with elections and electoral laws. The IBC must be in place. And as we speak, I think I had one of the governors saying for the last 4 months they haven't received money. So we need to have within the law a rule that the money that goes to the counties cannot be touched by the treasury. The treasury dispenses it at the time that is stipulated, but has no control over it. It's something that restrains the government, the executive, the treasury from interfering with that money. When that money is released after the budget, its move from the treasury or from wherever it comes from to the county governments should be unfettered, should be uninterfered with. Still on the powers of the president is we've seen this constant interference, this constant attempt to change our constitution and basically take us back to days of imperialism, an imperial president, days of dictatorship, where we were coming from. So maybe we can also put in the constitution, I think. I'm thinking large beyond the Gachagua impeachment thing. A law that states that attempts to interfere with the constitution, with certain parts of the constitution that have to do with the presidential authority, that have to do with the authority of the various arms of government, that any law that tries to change that not only has to be subjected to a referendum, but also even if there's a change, that change can only take place after a given period of time, so that we avoid a chance of the president or the executive passing on a law, changing the constitution to suit itself. For instance, when in the year 2014, Uhuru and the Jubilee government changed the laws around security and made the appointment of the IG of the police a job for the president instead of the independent commission that had originally been envisaged by the constitution, we can say even if such a change were approved by parliament or by anybody, even via referendum, it cannot take place until after 20 years or something like that. So that the person who moves the motion or the person who brings the bill in parliament is not the one who stands to benefit from it. Okay? So we say, if you want to change laws on security, whatever changes you make can only take place after you leave office. Okay? Now, to avoid the possibility of having what happened in Russia, where Putin retired as president, became prime minister, then after a time came back as president and continued on as if he never left, we must say we have a restriction. The president can only be in office for 2 terms maximum. But we must also state that whatever laws are made can only take place after a maximum of 2 times. For instance, if we vote for it now, if there's a constitutional change, then it can only come into effect after, let's say, 15 or 20 years. I think so. We need to protect ourselves. Because as I've said in another video, we produce enough revenue in this country to build a first world country right here. If we can stop the theft by the executive and all these bodies that surround it, if we can stop the corruption and the theft, in a short 10 years, as Kibaki showed us, we can turn this country from a third world nation to a second world nation, if there's such a thing as a second world, and eventually to a first world country.
I don't know who among us, once we take away the cloaks of the official roles we play, was proud as a Kenyan observing these events as they happened. I don't know who among us was proud now putting on the cloak of citizenship to watch these events unfold at that pace.